So just to introduce myself in terms of what roles I have here at Homerton, because I'm not assuming that you are au fait with the Cambridge speak. So Jon Phelan is my name. I'm Philosophy Fellow at Homerton, and I'm Director of Studies at Homerton. I'm also an external Director of Studies at Wolfson. I'm an undergraduate tutor. I'm a supervisor and an examiner, and I'm research active in aesthetics, particularly the philosophy of literature, and I have an interest in Iris Murdoch. So what's a director of studies? Essentially, it's someone who organizes your teaching for you through the course, and as well as doing some teaching in my own specialisms. I can give advice on paper choice for the next year. I write references, and I will be the person who, or one of the people who is involved in the admissions interview. As regards what an undergraduate tutor is, Cambridge, unlike Oxford, splits those roles. So in Oxford, the tutor has both care of the academic side of things and pastoral, but there are two different roles here. So I'm not the tutor to the philosophy students. You can't be a tutor for your own subject. So I look after the vets and PBS students and classicists. A supervisor is someone who then is a teacher and takes a supervision, the weekly supervision, where the student submits an essay in advance and I'll discuss it with them. And so I supervise for lots of subjects here. We're quite a small department, unlike Oxford, because philosophy at Cambridge is a single honours degree, whereas at Oxford you have to study philosophy with something else, so philosophy and maths, or philosophy and theology, or PPE. And so we all really supervise for each other's colleges. So I supervise for Emmanuel and Girton and Trinity and Magdalen and Lucy Cavendish and a whole range of different colleges. I would have thought examiner is fairly kind of self-evident. I'm one of the examiners in aesthetics, which is my paper. And so I guess things that you might be wondering about, whether philosophy is for you rather than another subject that swims alongside, what the course involves, the actual admissions process, something about the interview, maybe the workload, what it's like when you get here, and what you can do with it. So I'll try and break those down. If you're sitting there thinking, oh, I might study philosophy at university, or it might be theology, or it might be history, bear in mind that they're quite different subjects. I mean, even though you're doing A-levels in those three, at undergrad level, they are quite distinctive. And so it raises, and the underpinning question there is, what is philosophy, which is, of course, an old chestnut and itself is a philosophical question. And there's an interesting Philosophy Bites interview about that, where Nigel Warburton interviews about 40 philosophers and gets a kind of a different answer from each one. And so my answer is a fairly generic one. I think it's a family resemblance term. It's not a logically closed concept. Essentially, it raises a range of questions, often at an abstract level, and presents a kind of treasure trove of historical responses that you then, as the philosopher, can evaluate. And there is quite a distinctive methodology that's captured in what's called the Socratic method of question and answer, where you conjecture some kind of hypothesis, put it under scrutiny, so you think of an exception, realize it's problematic, refine the original claim, and continue until you've got a kind of something a bit more watertight. So philosophy as a subject became then more systematized through Kant and through Frege, and actually it's quite a broad church. So there are lots of different traditions within philosophy, and often it boils down to which country you're in. And certainly in the English-speaking world, the analytic tradition predominates. So analytic philosophy places an emphasis on argument and logic, linguistic analysis, and the role of science to help us out, as opposed to perhaps more of a historical or history of ideas approach, or kind of Freudianism. So Cambridge is very much has an analytic course. So I'm only mentioning that because if your interest is existentialism or Buddhism, or then maybe, so Cambridge might still be for you, but perhaps theology or MML, medieval and modern languages, might be a more suitable course. So if you're really undecided, how do you decide? Well, you're here kind of listening to a little spiel, so this might kind of persuade you, but you could always work backwards as to where do you want to be in 5 or 10 years' time, what's the most useful. You could look at the course. You could go for what really you find enjoyable. You could be motivated what you're best at. Or you could gather as much information as possible. So philosophy A-level isn't a facilitating subject. So that's the A-level offered by AQA rather than RS courses with philosophy in its title. So strictly speaking, a facilitating A-level subject is one that you need to have in order to study that subject at undergraduate. So chemistry, for instance, I think you need for various courses, such as chemistry, but also maybe medicine. Philosophy is not needed to study philosophy. So you could ideally have a few art subjects in there, say writing, but we welcome candidates who have done maths or STEM A-levels. But if you aren't sure what philosophy is, then do your homework a little bit in terms of gathering information. Maybe not now if you're preparing for exams, but over the summer, perhaps read the odd chapter of philosophy books, perhaps ones recommended in the introduction section to the papers that are on the course that make up the tripos, or the 3 years of the undergrad degree. So I should say something about the course. Essentially, it's 3 years, and there are 4 papers or 4 exams each year with a cheeky extra. So this is all on the website, but sometimes it's helpful for someone just to talk it through a little bit. So the first year involves metaphysics, ethics and political philosophy, set texts, and meaning. Meaning is essentially the philosophy of language. And the cheeky extra in the first year is the formal methods paper. So essentially learning logic. It doesn't count as a whole paper, but that runs alongside, and it's examined at the end of the year. In the second year, there's one compulsory paper, which is called Knowledge, Language and World. And essentially that's a fusion of metaphysics, epistemology, some philosophy of language. And you can then choose 3 papers. And the choice is out of aesthetics, political philosophy, ethics, jurisprudence, the philosophy of law, experimental psychology, the early modern paper, ancient philosophy. I probably missed 1 or 2 out. And the cheeky extra then in the second year is called the general paper. And so the general paper is 3 hours where you get a list of 1-word questions, and you choose one and you create your own question and then write a 4,000-word essay. So the words might be something like color or eye or intuition, consciousness. In the final year, then, there is a bit more choice insofar as you can choose all the 4 papers out of a range of topics, including the philosophy of mind, philosophical logic, mathematical logic. There are history of philosophy papers. And incidentally, Cambridge has the name for being very good at analytic philosophy and logic. But I think it's also strong in political philosophy and the history of um, philosophy. Uh, the one paper I missed out in the second year, sorry, that's important, is the history of analytic philosophy. Um, so we're talking about the third year, the final year. There are lots of papers to choose from. It's up to you to choose the four. And the cheeky extra is the general paper again, but you could always opt for a dissertation rather than the general paper, and you would submit a title. You can choose what to write about then. So, the as long as you have someone to supervise you and it's within analytic philosophy, then it's there are a whole range of topics that are covered. The advantages of studying philosophy at Cambridge, I'm guessing it's the history. It's also very well resourced with the university library. The philosophy library is good, and the librarian is excellent. She's ever so helpful. And also, you have the Moral Sciences Club. So I was just there this afternoon listening to a talk. So you get international scholars presenting their research on a Tuesday afternoon. How is the teaching organized? So four modes, really: supervisions, lectures, discussion groups, and logic classes. So how does a supervision work? Well, on 5 o'clock, by 5 o'clock the previous day, you submit your essay, having done some reading, having rustled up about 4 to 5 pages, and the supervisor then marks that and then goes through it with you. So there are slight kind of variations with this. I'm quite old school, where I will just kind of work through maybe 10 or so comments based on the essay. Some might be stylistic. How does paragraph 7 follow from 1 to 3 kind of thing? But other discussions could be surrounding the actual content and the quality of the evaluation. You would have then another thing to submit in the first year, which would be a logic worksheet. And so in terms of workload, I'm reckoning about 6 lectures a week, and a logic class, or a discussion seminar. They alternate between the weeks. So the supervision is 1 hour, the discussion group or the logic class is an hour. So we're up to 8 hours. Now that might not seem very much to you, but of course, you've got to prepare your essay. So you would do the reading, in a few days, slightly like philosophical journalism. You'd have about 4 or 5 days to do that, to write a draft and then send it off for a fresh pair of eyes to look over it. And also, you've got your social vitamins to enjoy, and maybe the lots of societies in Cambridge. You could Google Cambridge University societies and you get an alphabetic list of them. So certainly recommend that students do at least one, because often they're subsidized, and the whole range of really interesting things there to choose from. With regards to the application process, so there are lots of data points, including your personal statement in its new form, the references, your predicted grades, alongside the interviews. So the interviews, we try and interview as many people as we can. It's unusual not to interview someone. There are 2 interviews with 2 people. So essentially you have 4 judgments, and then we'd write a little report as to strengths and weaknesses, etc., and have a discussion. So there are lots of data points. It's still under discussion whether we will reintroduce the logic test or some written work. I think for you, if you're applying next round, I think that's unlikely, but that will mean that there might be one of the interviews might ask some logic questions. How do you prepare for that? Well, you could, I think Oxford actually has quite a good resource for it online. It has some previous logic questions, and Cambridge does as well, I think. What are we looking for in an interview? So some enthusiasm is always good. Some people are very nervous. We're well aware of that. So often people express their nerves in being quite quiet, which is fair enough. But some evidence of commitment and enthusiasm. I think some engagement and thoughtfulness, and also being able to cope with some pushback, because that's the kind of how the subject often works, that kind of dialectic between, okay, your view is this, back to the Socratic method, but hang on, have you considered these problems? Let's try and kind of work through them. So it's not a test of just how much knowledge you can reproduce. It's whether you are open-minded, or whether you can perhaps think of a way of resisting a potential objection to your view. So I'm not going to get into what's the typical philosophy student, because I don't think there is one. It comes in all various stripes. What to do with a philosophy degree? That's the kind of thing your mum might be asking at the moment, in terms of what are you going to do with it? Are you going to be able to make a living out of it? And I'd say that, thinking is very much a vocational skill. I mean, typically students go on to teaching, civil service, business, publishing, law. I think about a third of philosophy students go on to further study, which is interesting. And recently, Homerton students who have graduated have gone on to pursue further study, the media, law, and someone went into big game conservation, which was an interesting one. So pretty much, everything that's out there. Just to say something about philosophy at Homerton, and then I see that there was a question that perhaps we could address. So Homerton's really nice for lots of reasons. It's very friendly. There are 600 trees on site. I think it would be nice to visit, really, if you're considering Homerton, just to get the vibe. I think there are certain bad reasons for choosing Homerton. And one bad reason might be, oh, you share my interests. Yeah, so if I'm a philosophy fellow under DOS, and you're also interested in philosophy of literature or Iris Murdoch, or etc., so I'll apply to Homerton. I think that's a bad reason, because philosophy of literature and Iris Murdoch don't feature heavily, say, on the course. So I mean, when I first started doing the job, I was looking after lots of logicians, people who and philosophers of science, actually. So it really doesn't matter what your philosophical interests are. If you're a political animal, if you're into philosophy of science, if you're into logic, then certainly, still consider Homerton, because, as I say, we're kind of a small faculty who kind of know each other. And so my job is just to organize the teachings. Whatever your proclivities, they will be, catered for. Another bad reason is, you hear stories of people doing a statistical analysis of, which colleges are easiest to get into. And I think we all really have the same standard that we apply. So no college is any easier to get into than another. Good reasons to apply to Homerton is that our results are strong. So when I first took over, 4 students all got 2-1s, and then the next year a student got 2-1. But the last 3 years, we've had a nice flourish of firsts. So the last 3 years, really. So that we're only taking 1 or 2, 3 kind of max, really. So they're quite small numbers. but certainly the year before last, we had two students, one got a first, one got a two, a good 2-1. The year after, there was one student who got a first. Last year, student got a first. The other two students got 2-1s, one of which was the highest 2-1 out of all the colleges. So our results are good. I think that our philosophical community is quite strong. We can ask Joe about this, who's in his second year now, in that try and do something. We try and do something together once a term. So we don't kind of live in each other's pockets, but we have a social where we invite a guest speaker. We have a subject dinner. We've gone for a curry. I think we've got a bring and share meal planned for after the exam. So it's got a nice little philosophical community there. And we liaise with the theologians and classicists from time to time as well. And also, I think a good reason to do philosophy at Homerton is just the vibe at Homerton, really, that spirit of inclusivity, of community values, and it's slightly more kind of relaxed, perhaps, than other colleges. The other college will remain anonymous. I'm not being disparaging about the other colleges, but I was at a dinner the other week where a little group, after the fellows had left, were told off for singing Happy Birthday without permission. And so I couldn't see that happening at Homerton. That's quite strict. So Victoria, should I pause there and take any questions?
Yes, sounds great. Yeah.
There was one that whizzed through the screen there.
Yes, someone has asked, do you have any ideas of supercurriculars that can be useful and any particular areas of philosophy which could be interesting to discuss in a personal statement?
Supercurriculars, was that?
Yes.
So in other words, not on either the A level or
yeah.
So the standard knee-jerk reaction to that is Simon Blackburn's book Think, or Bertrand Russell's The Problem of Philosophy, or maybe Nagel's What Does It All Mean? So perhaps not any of those because everyone else is, and that makes it a bit boring. And I think maybe you could pursue your own interest. And so this sounds like something someone would say in one of these sessions, and no one actually does this, but you could almost, browse a charity shop and get a nice kind of A4 kind of pad that you turn into a philosophical journal. And just actually, because philosophy, like carpentry, is something that you do. And so you could start thinking about what interests you, whether it's, to do with the nature of depiction in painting, something that has annoyed you in the news, perhaps to do with the ethics of war, something, it doesn't have to be even extracurricular. It could be something that you wanted to pursue further from your A levels, whether that's philosophy of physics or actually philosophy straight. And start with a Pomodoro and just writing to yourself a bit about why am I interested in this and what's the problem here, and then do a little bit of digging, read a little bit, and just map your thought processes so you can kind of constructing a view. Hopefully that doesn't sound too kind of horrific. It's meant to be an enjoyable thing, but the danger of reading something slightly tokenistic now, like Simon Blackbird's Think, which is, it's an interesting book, but it seems slightly tokenistic. Oh, I've read this chapter, so I can just bring it into an interview, and so that might sound a bit name droppy.
Thank you. I will also, in fact, I'll do it now. Have put in a list of example supercurriculars. This is just for all subjects on the Homerton website. And as was said, it is not an exhaustive list. If you do all of the things that are on here, you will be doing all of the things that lots of other people will be doing as well. So use it as the same with all research, kind of start with one thing and use it to kind of snowball and find other things, explore your own interests. But, at the end of the day, it's not a tick box exercise, an application. You've got to explore and show that authentic interest as well.
Yes, well said. And if you really have no idea at all, then certainly the philosophy faculty website has a list of about a dozen recommended books that include Simon Blackbird's thing and Bertrand Russell's from etc., etc.
A couple of questions as well that have come up in the Q&A as well. So, are there reduced offers for 4 A levels?
I don't think so.
No. How significant are predicted grades?
I think it would be unusual if the candidate wasn't predicted at least an A star and 2 A's. But given that that's not really a game changer, I think I would like to make up my own mind on people.
Yes, so kind of contextual information is required for that answer. But yes, the minimum offer is an A star and 2 A's. And what sort of written work should we be submitting? Is there also any restrictions on how early the work is written?
That's a really good question. I'd love you to submit written work, but in the age of AI, that's gone out now. Now, whether it will come back, there's potential, as in some other subjects. I think English and law are the case where there are independent centres that might run a kind of written exam, but that's certainly not coming up any time soon. So in other words, you don't have to submit written work. The written work would be, I guess, what you're doing at school or college, and that would feed into your predicted grades. And then obviously the kind of written work that's part of the A level or Leaving Cert or Scottish Highers.
Will it make my personal statement weaker if I don't talk about analytic philosophy, given you said Cambridge is very focused on it?
I don't think so, no. But at the same time, my antennae would twitch if it was a personal statement all about, say, Sikh philosophy, because it's just not the course for that. So that's not being disparaging about Sikh philosophy. It's just there's no one here to teach it, and that's not really the style of Cambridge philosophy. So I'm thinking if it was something to do with aesthetics or political or philosophy of law, philosophy of science, that's grand. It doesn't have to be the history of analytic philosophy. So it wouldn't put me off. But I would be a bit careful. I would just soul search a little bit as to what your interests really are. Because there are lots of good courses and lots of things at Cambridge and beyond, really.
Another personal statement question. I was wondering if I mention a philosophical video game in my personal statement, is that okay?
Yeah, that's okay. I mean, I'm well aware of that I'm a bit old-fashioned, so I need to kind of I'll keep an open mind. I'm also very aware that, it's a very difficult genre to write the personal statement without sounding a real wally, to be honest. So I think, if you're interested in philosophical issues that video games give rise to, then that would be interesting. There's a book by Gary Young, I think, about the ethics of virtual reality that's worth looking at in that respect.
In an interview, are you judged on how eloquently you articulate ideas?
No, that is, again, a good question. And I think I would be put off a bit by, super eloquence. Most colleges interview online, some in person, but with eloquence, it has the whiff of a rehearsed answer about it a little bit. And so a little bit of kangaroo petroling through where there are awkward silences or evidence that you're actually engaging with the subject matter in a thoughtful way, often isn't an eloquent kind of process.
And then someone has asked, how do I know which college is right for me? And I will echo what was said earlier. I think the best way to make a decision is if you can come on an open day, then just get a vibe for each of the colleges. Every single one is very different. As we said before, Homerton is very relaxed, very friendly. That's not to say that the other colleges aren't. It's just everyone is very, very different. And you know, some colleges will be ideal for some people and others might not feel quite as home. So, you know, first of all, the most important thing is decide on which colleges offer the subject that you want to study, but then use that as your shortlist. Which ones do I want to go and visit on an open day? So our open days are on the 9th and 10th of July and then the 11th of September. So sign up to attend one of those and kind of come to visit. Definitely come to visit Homerton as well and get a sense of whether it's right for you. If you can't come on an open day, you know, explore the kind of the websites. Also, lots of colleges have quite a social media presence, day in the life videos, and also the Student Union website has an alternative prospectus from a student perspective, so you can kind of get a sense of what each of the colleges are like as well. So it is personal preference, but I would say, you know, as much as it seems like a silly answer, but actually vibe is a really important thing on that as well.
In the past, we've been kind of around for those open days, and I certainly will check the 9th and the 10th and try and be around. And so if you are visiting, then, you know, do swing by or, you know, have a chat. So I think I went to Magdalen as an undergrad. I think my decision, Magdalen, Cambridge, my decision was based on, the fact that the DOS was Irish and I'm Irish, and also that the porters were friendly. So they aren't very good reasons. But at the same time, the porters were very friendly, and it was a really friendly, you know, it is a really friendly college, so the vibe is important. But I guess decision-making criteria, whether you'd like a small college or a large one, whether you'd like traditional architecture, you know, one of the really old ones, or maybe a little bit more modern, which college is near your faculty. I mean, I said, don't be put off applying if you don't have, don't be too swayed by what interests the fellow in that subject has. But at the same time, you know, if you are, you know, a political animal and you want to, then maybe you want to have a look at which, you know, where the political philosophers are, or philosophy of physics, say, because you can then get a chance to chat about these things. But the Hall of Residence, Victoria, really, aren't they? And I think depending on who's in your year and who you're friends with, you know, there's so many variables. It's not something I think to worry about too much.
And
it's the same course, in other words, whichever college you're at.
The course will be kind of very similar in different places. You're still doing the same course. As I said, also, you know, it will kind of be your base throughout your studies, but you will have your college community is just one community that you are part of. And that's the great thing about Cambridge, is that you have so many different people that you interact with on a day-to-day basis. So yes, there are a range of other questions. So I will answer some of them written, just because some of them will just require some links, would be great. But do have a look at them if you're listening. But there is one question here. Is there a lot of competition or academic pressure on your students? And how does this change depending on college?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the pressure is off from my angle, as it were. I'm not kind of putting people and students under massive pressure, because that's not my style, and also it has a completely counterproductive effect. You know, that's all they can think about then is rather the subject matter is, oh no, I need to do really well at this because of you know, X, Y, and Z. But I think we need to be realistic. You know, philosophy at Cambridge is probably one of the toughest undergrad courses in this subject in the world. So it's not for the faint-hearted. So I think the pressure really comes from the subject itself, it can be tricky. I mean, a lot of the style of learning is actually set up to take the pressure off, even though it might seem pressurized. E.g., lectures move quite quickly, but that's to give the audience a helpful overview. So as actually rather than spend ages reading, they can see where they want to perhaps pursue. And also that's like time pressure of let's write an essay in 4 days and have a supervision is an antidote to perfectionism, really. You could write the same kind of essay in a whole term or year, and it would have the same kind of logical shape, the same gaps, the same good points, the same inadequacies or things that need clarifying. So it just speeds it up a little bit in terms of, write a first pass and let's have a look. And it's always work in progress. So it might feel quite pressurized, as well as, if you're doing lots of nice things as well. But actually, it's devised to take the pressure off a little bit. We're asked to give a kind of just a 20-minute presentation as to, something in our subject. And so I don't want to waste your time with this, going off at a kind of slightly weird tangent. So I thought, well, what topic is relevant to, say, the A-level philosophy or even RS? Skepticism is part of the kind of epistemology. And so we can then just talk about what the problem is. And maybe I'll look at a few possible responses. And then what I want to do is really point to the fact that, hi Joe, how philosophy is different at undergrad than at A-level. In three respects, really, at the end. So there are lots of different forms of skepticism insofar as we can doubt lots of things. So maybe we could just keep the examples stable with one thing. So in Descartes' first meditation, his second wave of doubt, he raises a question as to how do we know we're not dreaming? How do we know that what I'm perceiving at the moment, looking out the window, at the grounds, etc., the books on my shelf, isn't just a dream? In other words, that there's no external world at all. And so a lot of skeptical arguments take the same kind of logical form, that if I can't know that the skeptical scenario is false, I cannot know that the skeptical scenario is false. And if I cannot know that the skeptical scenario is false, then I lack a significant class of my beliefs. Therefore, I lack a significant class of my beliefs. So the point in framing it in a slightly more formal way is that you can see that the skeptic isn't really asserting anything like an atheist, that definitely there isn't an external world there. This is all a dream. It's framed in terms more like agnosticism of a question, that you don't know for sure that what you see isn't a dream. And so the advantage of framing it in these terms is that it gives us a clue as to what we're looking for by way of an answer. And so what we're looking for is really a form of killing off skepticism, where I can then say, well, I do know that the skeptical hypothesis is false. And so it's useful, I think, in philosophy then to have some sense of a criterion of how we're going to judge what an answer looks like. Because, in some cases, we just don't know what an answer would look like at all. Thinking of the hard problem of consciousness a bit in that respect. But in other cases, actually, the history of philosophy provides, a whole warehouse or treasure trove of various answers. And can be a bit overwhelmed as to, well, how do I know who's right? So I'm looking for a way of killing off doubt. So we could have a few of these answers. The next one, please. one reaction might be, oh, does it really matter whether we know, whether this is actually a dream or whether it's not? Because if we are being deceived, we could perhaps just play our perceptions like a computer game. So we could still play to win. And so that seems more psychological. So rather than the arrow pointing at the state of affairs, is this a dream or is it reality? It's pointing to me and my mind and my psychological or emotional reaction to the challenge. So that doesn't come close to even an answer. And also, I'd be a bit worried about someone who thinks, oh, it doesn't matter. An analogy might be whether it matters to you whether your friend likes you or not. And so the same kind of person who says this, it doesn't matter, might say, oh, it doesn't matter whether my friend likes me or not, as long as I believe it, that's what counts. But that can get you into quite kind of hot water in terms of kind of loyalty or in different kind of with different scenarios where it's important that they are a genuine friend. The next one is that, well, there isn't any evidence for skepticism, so we shouldn't be a skeptic. As a picture of someone who values evidence. And I think that misrepresents the skeptical challenge, insofar as it's not a matter of evidence, it's more of a challenge that's laid down just by entertaining skepticism itself. So the burden of proof doesn't rest with a skeptic to prove skepticism. It's just a rather annoying kind of question that's raised. How do you don't really know for sure that whatever, the world is actually there. We mentioned Descartes, and so it seems remiss not to look at his response. So Descartes is, of course, radically anti-skeptical. So he's using skepticism in order to find what resists philosophical doubt. And so famously, it's probably one of the most famous kind of tags in philosophy. He believes that we can say for sure that we're thinking, even if we're being deceived. And if we're thinking, then there must be something that's thinking that exists. So famously, he says, I'm thinking, therefore I exist. And he gets very excited in the meditations about this at the beginning of meditation 2, because he says, this is a clear and distinct idea. It has an aura of certainty about it. So maybe I can believe, all clear and distinct ideas. And of course, he then realizes, oh, no, I can't, because these clear and distinct ideas, whether they're a priori or a posteriori, slide back to skepticism. So he needs God as a guarantee of clear and distinct ideas, which leads to certainty. And so he's a great system builder like Kant. And the problem with building these systems is that you only need to take one little kind of snap off one little bit, or take one brick out for the system to collapse. And people have doubted cogito ergo sum, that we can actually be as certain as in the same way that he thinks we can. And of course, there's lots of skepticism surrounding God. Maybe we could fast forward through Berkeley or linguistic phenomenalism. I think that's on the A level, reliabilism. And so you might say, well, look, I think that I'm not dreaming. I perceive this coherent, very lifelike series of perceptions. And perception is good enough for me. It's generally reliable. So therefore, general reliability is enough for knowledge. So the problem there, of course, is that it moves the skepticism. It moves it to general reliability. so you can doubt general reliability fairly easily. And it certainly doesn't come up to the criterion that we're looking for. We're looking for a way of killing off skepticism. And this just seems to live with it. By saying, okay, we can live with a bit of skepticism. I'm fine with just a generally reliable process. We should talk about Russell and Moore and Wittgenstein because these are famous Cambridge philosophers. And then I'll kind of draw a conclusion as to why this might be relevant for you. So abductive reasoning, sometimes called reasoning to or inferring to the truth of the best explanation. You could argue as follows: I perceive a collection of data. The existence of an external world, if true, would explain why I'm perceiving this collection of data, and no other hypothesis explains the data as well. Therefore, the external world hypothesis is probably true, and that seems to actually make the same kind of mistake as reliabilism. Being probably true isn't good enough. We've got Moore then, G.E. Moore, who concedes a degree of skepticism. So in the philosophy class or in a philosophy essay, we can't actually meet the skeptical challenge. So he concedes that we lack knowledge that the skeptical hypothesis is false. But for Moore, this doesn't entail that we lose all that we hold dear. So that doesn't mean that we lack knowledge of a significant class of beliefs because we can believe the things we do through common sense. Now, whether common sense is the right way to approach this rather technical problem seems problematic in the same way as perhaps approaching an ethical question as to what we should do by just saying, oh, let's just get on with being generally caring and sharing, not let's worry about the theorizing. So we really are looking, I think, in the problem of skepticism for a theoretical answer to a theoretical problem, and Moore is changing the kind of the language game or the rules of the game there by bringing in common sense. And so to Wittgenstein, and Wittgenstein's response is very much focused on language. And that's the next one. So Wittgenstein's answer is that we need to look carefully at how language is used. And if we do so, then we realize actually a skeptical hypothesis like Descartes' streaming argument is incoherent. So the final slide after this is that we agree the meaning of some terms as a community of language users. And there are some terms that we use that point to things. So Felix the cat is given as an example where the phrase Felix the cat points to that particular cat that's over there. But not all words work like that. So mind, reality, the external world, God, heaven, moral truth, etc. Wittgenstein argues don't work like that. And so how do they work? Well, there's a lot to be said about that. But we agree the meaning of these terms between ourselves. So there's something dodgy then in agreeing the meaning of these terms amongst ourselves, and then suddenly changing the game to, oh, I wonder whether this term actually refers to something that's real, like Felix the cat. So for Wittgenstein, that misuses or misunderstands how we're actually using a certain tranche of terms. Now, the point of all of this, thanks, Victoria, the point of all of this is really to illustrate, okay, to take an A-level topic, so skepticism, and to draw a contrast between how it's studied at A-level and how it's studied at as an undergrad. And so I think A-level, maybe over the A-level philosophy, say over the last 10 years or so, has put an emphasis very much on breadth. So it's, here's a problem, here are lots of answers, and also placing a bit more emphasis also on learning evaluation. And so trotting out, here are some arguments for, here are some arguments against, and then, reaching a conclusion based on those arguments for and against. And so I think the contrast with philosophy as undergrad is that you could take any one of those answers and write a whole essay on it. So you could, the first initial kind of paragraph could be his, feeling the pain of the problem, but then you could take more as an answer, and you could then extemporize as to how the Morean response works, a little bit anchored in the text. You could then address some advantages of that, but predict also problems with the Morean response. And then the conclusion would drop out whether you're a Morean or not. So I want to emphasize the fact that philosophy at undergrad is more into depth than breadth. And also, I think that's quite a nice topic because, when we started introducing the problem of skepticism, we talked a little bit about what logical form does it have? How does the electricity move through the circuitry of reasoning? And I think that's something that the analytic tradition is particularly interested in as well. And it really doesn't matter what the subject matter is. It could be science or consciousness or religion or morality, or just how much we know. It's the logical moves and whether they work is of interest. Joe, as a paid-up philosopher, might have some reflections on that to bring him in.
Hello?
He knows a lot more about Wittgenstein than I do.
No.
He's even got the book.
Yeah, I do have, only from a library. So is the question about
question, I guess, is how different is philosophy at undergrad is to maybe at RS or philosophy A level?
Yeah, I think it is. There's definitely less of a focus on breadth, and definitely you're rewarded for a streamlined argument, where it's almost kind of premise, conclusion. And obviously your premises don't have to be completely bulletproof. I don't think the examiners or your kind of supervisor will be assuming that you're a kind of philosopher who solved everything. There are going to be problems. But I think there is an emphasis on showing the structure of the argument and having it all coherently laid out. And I think that is different to A-level and RS. I did RS. I know a lot of people did A-level philosophy, but I'm assuming it's also similar for A-level philosophy.
I like that point about not wanting to be not needing to be bulletproof. Because certainly some supervisors are very much on it and can be quite fierce in terms of the argument and getting it right. But they're not fierce to individuals. I think they're very supportive to all of us because it's a tricky thing. It's always going to be work in progress.
Yeah. I think it's always good to consider potential objections to the points you raise in your argument, but at the end of the day, there will be problems, and your supervisor might point them out to you. But that's the kind of beauty in the debate, where you can expand on your knowledge and understanding of a topic. So yeah.
And I think that's the moral of the story is quite nice, kind of outside philosophy, because I mean, if you've got an issue, you've got a view. You don't want to seek out a group of sycophants to just kind of, reinforce your bias, as it were. You want to seek out someone who holds a different view and test it out on them and see whether you can persuade them or not in a kind of civilized way.
Definitely.
Thanks for that. Victoria, how do you want to do the rest of it? Look at the questions maybe in the chat or...
Yes, yeah, absolutely. So there is a question here about what opportunities are there to study philosophy of the mind or experimental psychology within the course? And if I did philosophy at Cambridge, could I specialise in psychological research later in life?
Yep. So I can take that. The experimental psychology is currently counts as one second year option, and the philosophy of mind is a whole paper in the final year. There's probably bits of philosophy of mind that run through the whole course, e.g., Descartes' dualism in the first year, a little bit of metaphysics, some in knowledge, language, and world. But it's, if you're interested in philosophy of mind, it's such a rich area. Then we do have a couple of specialists in the philosophy of mind. With that question about signing up as a psychological researcher, I'm not so sure. I mean, my remit isn't to plug Oxford courses, but would you not do philosophy and psychology in Oxford? That do it combine maybe and have a stronger psychology avenue.
Great. Someone has asked, what skills are you expected to have before taking this degree, and what skills are you expected to have after taking philosophy?
Oh, that's tricky. I'll let Joe answer that one.
I think the skills you're expected to have before, I guess, just reasoning skills and being able to argue at all, really. And then I think there's definitely a focus on developing that through the degree. So other than like just arguing and being able, just arguing. And maybe I'm just being able to understand content, but I guess that's not very specific.
No, it's interesting though, because with the question, it's kind of whatever the skills are. After the degree, you'd hopefully have the same skills. You wouldn't lose. You wouldn't be de-skilled.
Yes.
You'd have the same skills but better. But the question seems to be asking in terms of might there be new skills that are added?
Okay.
Could you be a bit more open-minded, possibly?
Yeah, I think that's definitely one. But that's probably something that's developed on as well, because I don't think anyone's really coming into philosophy with a extremely closed mind. Yeah.
I think also there are a lot of skills that you will just naturally develop whilst being at university anyway, just because of the nature of, a lot more independence, kind of time management skills, and just generally it is a big time for kind of development of, and especially when you've got a lot more independence within your studies as well. So definitely, yeah.
That's interesting to reflect on. Actually, why university at all? Well, maybe it's not the right. But the arguments will be quite personal, wouldn't they, in terms of greater independence, maybe learning certain vocational skills like kind of digesting a complex and presenting, synthesizing an argument is useful, like in report writing. A degree might count as an equity card as well for certain jobs. But I'm a purist really at heart, and I think those are all advantages for people doing the degree. But it's not all about the people. I mean, it's about the subject as well, and whether you can advance philosophy. So it might be. I mean, I don't ask that, to be honest, with interviews. Why philosophy? Why Cambridge? Because I think if you're really into it, you just are. And it can throw candidates sometimes. Either they have a pre-rehearsed answer, or it can throw them as in, oh, I don't know, I just really like it, or I'm curious about it, or.
I think also time management is one of the skills that I've definitely not necessarily kind of restricted to a philosophy degree, but just being in virtue of being at university, having more independence and a less kind of directly structured work week definitely leads to you being forced, but not necessarily in an aggressive way, but like you definitely develop better time management skills, I've
Just to
found.
big up Joe for a second and embarrass him in front of everyone.
Oh no.
Your first term this year, I thought was
Mm.
very tricky. Actually, your workload
Oh
was
yeah.
quite heavy, but you you survived it, not
I
knocked
did.
everything into shape. And that links with what Victoria was quoting, that statistic um, of being very kind of employable. And I think in future employers know what the Cambridge training involves.
Great. There's another question here. What is your favourite thing that you have learned about the philosophy of literature, and has studying the philosophy of literature changed how you view the world?
Ooh, possibly one and the same thing. To deal with the second question first, I'm particularly interested in maybe close reading of literature. So the kind that the literary critics like F.R. Leavis or A. Richards, Cambridge academics would push back in the day. And I think it's often, I think, overlooked on the curriculum, just how skillful that attention to detail is. So, uh, that's something that I'm interested in, and that's something that I think I enjoy as well. And it's just by its nature has changed how I interact with the world. It sounds a bit kind of a bit too theoretical, but yeah, that critical attention.
Great, thank you. Someone else has asked how significant GCSE results are in terms of an application for you.
I think it's one data point among many, but there's no point in harping on an occasion like this about the importance of curiosity and open-mindedness and you know intellectual charitability, etc., and courage, intellectual courage, and then be very close-minded about something like applications. But I would see it as one data point among many. There was a fashion, I think, years ago, where someone said, and it became a bit of a meme, that the GCSE score is a better indication of how a student will perform in their degree than A level. But I wouldn't like to kind of reduce students to statistics. I think it really depends on the individual, and how they're maturing through their academic life.
Yeah, great. And I would say as well, if you're asking that because you're potentially worried about underperformance in a specific GCSE, then just speak to your UCAS referee, because as part of their reference that they write about you, they can talk about perhaps that if there was a reason for that, or they can kind of discuss that within that, and that's just can help to provide the picture to those people reading your application. So please don't think that that is kind of the end of your application at all. Would the workload be too much for a slow reader or writer?
Joe, do you want to?
I don't, no, I don't think. Definitely not inherently so. I think reading's definitely a skill again that you can learn just through doing it. And I think philosophy, it might be. Some of the articles can definitely be quite challenging if you haven't done a lot of philosophy specifically, and I definitely found that myself. But just over various number of iterations, you definitely do pick it up as a skill. And I think lectures also help to supplement the readings as well. So you're not just kind of thrown in the middle of the deep end. And so yeah, they kind of structure the reading, so there's less pressure on it. But then that's not to say that reading isn't important. But yeah, I definitely think it's something you can learn. That's well said.
Yeah, and the reading is quite tailored, isn't it? As in, it would
Mm.
be specific chapters or papers. It wouldn't
Yeah.
be. I mean, sometimes you might have to read a book, but it's not. Oh, here's a big wad of books that you need to get through
Yeah.
by Thursday. That would be ridiculous. And when
Yeah.
we went out for a cup of tea with Jane Heel,
Mm.
in whenever that was in November, I thought she was interesting, where she said that she actually likes students sometimes to just read one article about 3 times and really wrestle with, how it works and respond to that, rather than try and read like a vacuum cleaner and just, hoover up kind of as much as you can and just give a digest.
Yeah.
So it's kind of quality rather than quantity. And often slower readers can read with in a qualitative way.
And I think it's also better where you're kind of reading in preparation for your essay of the week. So with that goal in mind, your essay isn't going to be on like every aspect of every reading. So you're going to be reading the specific part. Well, you're going to be paying close attention to the specific parts, and I think that definitely serves to lessen the kind of mental load of the reading.
Yeah, great. And also on that, if it's something that you're worried about, then there are lots of colleges. I know that there's support here at Homerton as well. That, for example, our library team will run sessions on kind of supporting with kind of academic reading and kind of developing some of those study skills, because you are going to be supported with that, and it is something that your first term, you might throughout that time in your first term and then beyond, you will kind of get more and more confident with things like this.
There were recent years I've spotted two students who have had dyslexia that wasn't kind of identified at school. It was identified here, and we worked on that.
There's one more question, which is very, very specific, but just whether you have any ideas about this. Someone has asked whether you have suggestions on linking an EPQ in making a music album to philosophy in a way that it could allow an EPQ to be referenced in a personal statement and interview. My first thought is, as said before, you don't kind of mention things in a kind of tokenistic way if you don't feel like it is truly relevant. There is still value in doing your EPQ, and you can talk about kind of some of the value in that, and there are other ways that you could explore your kind of philosophical interests. But just wondered whether you had any further guidance on that, either of you.
So I think with philosophical questions about music can work on 2 levels, really. One can just be its ontological status. What kind of thing is music? How is it different from other sounds? And I guess you could have that John Cage 4.5 minutes as a case study. In terms of, is that music or not, etc. Or I guess you could get quite specific in terms of here's some music that raises certain ethical or political kind of challenges and themes. So you're hanging a bit of political philosophy or ethics on the content, or possibly I get a whiff of this person just wants to listen to their favorite music and write an EPQ about it. So, I mean, embrace the pleasure, enjoy it, but then you could reflect philosophically on why you're enjoying it. What's aesthetically pleasing about that, which is a philosophical question. And I should say that I run the same risk, as in, philosophy is a bit tricky. Should I just read some literature that I enjoy and pretend that I'm doing philosophy? So I can empathize with that.
Great. Well, that is all of the questions that we have currently.
Good questions, aren't they? Wide ranging, and that's brilliant. Everyone's had a chance to have their say.
But thank you very, very much to our panelists for today's session. It was really, really interesting. I definitely learned a lot as well. So I hope that those of you that are in attending today have as well. And after the session, I will kind of upload it to our YouTube channel so you can kind of refer back to it at a later point. But thank you very much.
Great. Thanks for hosting, Victoria. And thanks for your company, Joe. And thanks for all your questions. That's brilliant. Good stuff.
Cool.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.